There is a strange comfort in beginning again. A man tells himself that tomorrow will be cleaner, stronger, holier than today, and so he permits today to be wasted. He calls it hope, when often it is only delay dressed in noble clothing. We admire the idea of transformation, but tremble at the reality of it, for real change is not the painting of old walls, but the pulling down of the house and the laying of a new foundation. Many of us are not failing because we are weak, but because we are secretly loyal to the person we have always been. We return to the familiar ruins of ourselves because they are known territory. To become disciplined, honest, brave, or truly free would require the death of certain excuses, certain comforts, perhaps even certain friendships. And so we start over again and again, not because we love progress, but because we fear arrival. For if we were to continue, steadily, seriously, without retreat, we might one day meet a version of ourselves we can no longer hide from. A person with no alibi left. A person responsible for his gifts. A person capable of greatness, and therefore no longer permitted the luxury of pretending he is not. There is a peculiar comfort in beginning again, and many mistake it for progress. A fresh start feels innocent. It carries the fragrance of possibility, untouched by yesterday's failures, unstained by the evidence of our own inconsistency. We tell ourselves that Monday will be different, that next month will be the true beginning, that after one more rest, one more plan, one more burst of inspiration, we shall finally become the person we were meant to be. Yet often this ritual of restarting is not movement at all, but a refined form of standing still. The human heart is clever in its self-deception. It would rather draft a perfect future than endure the humiliation of imperfect persistence. To begin is glorious because beginnings ask for very little. They require intention, perhaps emotion, perhaps a public declaration that sounds noble enough to convince even ourselves. Continuing, however, demands something far less romantic. It asks for repetition. It asks for patience when excitement has died. It asks for faithfulness in silence, when no one applauds and no visible reward arrives. And so many become addicted not to discipline, but to the feeling of discipline. They love the journal more than the habit, the resolution more than the routine, the announcement more than the action. Starting over allows them to preserve the image of themselves as someone on the verge of greatness, while avoiding the burden of becoming great. For true growth is not dramatic, it is often dull, embarrassingly ordinary, and deeply inconvenient. A man may abandon his work and call it reflection. He may delay his duty and call it preparation. He may run from commitment and name it freedom. In this way, language becomes an accomplice to cowardice. We polish our excuses until they shine like virtues. We say we are waiting for clarity, when in truth we are waiting for certainty, and certainty is rarely given to those who refuse to walk before they can see the whole road. There is also pride hidden in constant restarting. To persist badly offends our vanity. We would rather quit and begin anew than be seen stumbling through the middle. The beginner is forgiven, the struggler is exposed. As long as we remain at the starting line, our potential is untouched, still perfect in imagination. The moment we continue despite failure, that imagined perfection must die. We are forced to confront our actual selves, limited, distracted, inconsistent, and painfully human. Yet this confrontation is the very place where transformation begins. No soul is changed by admiration alone. One may admire discipline, read about courage, praise humility, and remain exactly the same. Change enters through practice, through the repeated surrender of comfort, through choosing the harder good when no emotion supports it. It is not the grand decision made once, but the quiet decision made again and again when no one is watching. The tragedy is that many live their entire lives circling the doorway of their own becoming. They are forever preparing to live, forever arranging the conditions under which they might finally begin. But life is not waiting politely outside until we are ready. It is passing even now, while we reorganize our intentions. Time does not pause for our hesitation, it simply records it. To keep starting over may feel hopeful, but hope without endurance is only a beautiful form of avoidance. There comes a moment when another fresh start is not courage, but escape. The question is no longer whether you can begin again, but whether you can remain when the novelty fades, when the work becomes plain, when the person in the mirror is still unfinished and unimpressive. For the soul is not built in moments of inspiration, but in long obedience to small necessities. A man becomes what he repeatedly refuses to avoid. He is shaped less by his dreams than by what he does on ordinary afternoons, when no one is looking and nothing feels significant. The comfort of restarting must eventually be exchanged for the harder grace of continuing. We often speak of change as though it were a pleasant decoration, something like adding a brighter color to an old room, or opening a window to let in fresh air. But true transformation is rarely so gentle. It is not the improvement of the old self, it is often the painful dismantling of it. That is why so many desire change in theory and resist it in practice. They do not fear success as much as they fear what success will demand of them. To become a different person is to lose certain familiar parts of yourself, even the miserable ones. A man may complain endlessly of his habits, yet secretly protect them because they have become part of his identity. His excuses, his delays, his self-pity, even his failures, these are not merely obstacles to him, they are furniture in the house of his personality. Remove them, and he feels not liberated, but strangely empty. We cling to our chains because they have warmed to the shape of our wrists. There is comfort in being known, even if what is known is broken. The old self is predictable. Its weaknesses are familiar companions. Its limitations provide a kind of shelter. For if I have always been lazy, fearful, or undisciplined, then I am spared the responsibility of becoming otherwise. I can point to my nature as though it were a prison sentence rather than a habit long protected. Transformation threatens this arrangement. It whispers that perhaps I could be more, and with that possibility comes accountability. This is why many sabotage their own growth at the very edge of progress. They approach the threshold of change and then retreat, inventing reasons that sound sensible enough to hide the truth. They say the timing is wrong, the circumstances unfair, the path unclear. Sometimes these things are real, but often they are only masks worn by fear. For what frightens us is not merely the labor ahead, but the death of the person we have spent years defending. Real change requires grief. One must mourn the version of oneself that cannot come forward into the new life. The man who becomes disciplined must say farewell to the man who is always forgiven for inconsistency. The woman who chooses courage must bury the comfort of being perpetually rescued by others. The person who seeks truth must release the pleasant lies that once made life easier to bear. Transformation is wholly partly because it asks for sacrifice, and pride resists sacrifice. Pride prefers renovation to surrender. It would like to keep the throne and merely improve the kingdom. It wants growth without humility, progress without confession, victory without the embarrassment of admitting weakness. But the soul does not heal by cosmetic repair. One cannot place virtue on top of vanity like fresh paint on rotting wood and call it strength. The foundation itself must be examined, and often broken open. There is also the terror of unfamiliar goodness. Strange as it sounds, some people are more frightened by peace than by chaos. Chaos is known territory. They have learned how to survive there. Peace feels exposed, discipline feels rigid, joy feels suspicious, love feels dangerous because it can be lost. So they return to disorder, not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering has become their language. Misery, when repeated long enough, begins to feel like home. Yet the soul was not made to remain in ruins simply because the ruins are familiar. Fear may persuade us that staying the same is safer, but safety purchased at the cost of growth is only another form of imprisonment. We are not preserved by refusing transformation, we are diminished by it. The refusal to change does not protect the self, it slowly hardens it into something smaller than it was meant to be. To step into real transformation is to accept uncertainty, to allow parts of yourself to die before you fully understand what will replace them. It is to trust that surrender is not annihilation, but the beginning of becoming. It is to walk forward without the old excuses, without the old hiding places, without the old permission to remain half-formed. There is a strange loyalty many people keep, not to their future, but to their former selves. They speak often of change, of ambition, of the person they wish to become, yet their daily choices reveal a quieter allegiance. They remain faithful to old habits, old wounds, old excuses, as though betraying these things would somehow be a betrayal of themselves. In truth, many are not held back by weakness alone, but by a deep and stubborn devotion to the person they have always been. We imagine loyalty as a noble thing, and often it is. To remain faithful to what is good, true, and worthy is a virtue. But loyalty can become dangerous when it is given to what should have been left behind. A man may stay loyal to his failures because they have become familiar companions. He knows how to be disappointed in himself. He has rehearsed it for years. Success, on the other hand, feels like a foreign language. To move toward it would require him to abandon the old identity he has worn for so long that he mistakes it for his skin. Some people introduce themselves to life through their limitations. They do not merely say they struggle, they become the struggle. I am lazy. I am broken. I am the kind of person who never finishes. These phrases are spoken so often they cease to be observations and become commandments. The soul begins to obey what it repeatedly hears. Soon any attempt at growth feels like dishonesty, as though becoming better were somehow pretending to be someone else. But we must ask, is the old self truly the truest self, or is it merely the most practiced one? Habit has a way of disguising itself as identity. We think we are protecting authenticity when we defend our worst patterns, but often we are only protecting familiarity. The man who says, "This is just who I am," may simply mean, "This is who I have been unwilling to challenge." There is also sentimentality in our attachment to the old self. We preserve old versions of ourselves like faded letters in a drawer, not because they are useful, but because they are emotionally expensive to discard. Our past pain becomes part of our story, and we fear that healing it would erase something essential. We clutch old disappointments because they explain us. We keep old resentments because they justify us. We protect our flaws because they excuse us. Yet maturity requires a certain holy disloyalty. There are parts of your former self that deserve abandonment, not hatred perhaps, but release. The child who survived by fear cannot rule the adult who must now live by courage. The person who once needed procrastination as protection cannot carry it forever and still expect peace. At some point, loyalty to your past becomes disobedience to your future. This is difficult because growth feels like treason before it feels like freedom. When you first choose discipline over impulse, honesty over performance, responsibility over comfort, something inside you protests. The old self rises like a neglected king demanding its throne back. It tells you that this new path is unnatural, too hard, too unlike you. But perhaps that discomfort is not proof that you are wrong. Perhaps it is proof that you are finally leaving the prison. We are often more committed to being recognizable than to being transformed. We want others to say, "Yes, that is exactly who he has always been." But what if faithfulness to your purpose requires becoming almost unrecognizable to the person you once were? What if the greatest act of integrity is not preserving the old self, but refusing to let it have the final word? The danger is not merely that we stay the same, but that we defend staying the same as wisdom. We baptize our stagnation with noble language. We call it realism, humility, self-acceptance. But self-acceptance is not the same as self-surrender. To accept where you are is honest. To worship it is fatal. A person becomes free not when he finally approves of every broken part of himself, but when he stops mistaking brokenness for belonging. There are versions of you that must be thanked for surviving and then firmly left behind. Not every past self deserves permanent residence in your future. Some were only meant to carry you to the door, not to walk with you through it. Excuses rarely arrive wearing the face of dishonesty. They come dressed in reason, in weariness, in woundedness, and often in language so respectable that even the soul begins to trust them. A man does not usually say, "I am choosing comfort over growth." He says, "I need more time." He says, "This is not the right season." He says, "I work better under pressure." In this way, excuses become less like lies and more like gentle agreements we make with ourselves to postpone the difficult good. There is a peculiar tenderness people show toward their own excuses. We defend them as though they were fragile creatures deserving protection. We explain them, polish them, repeat them until they feel almost sacred. The excuse becomes not merely a reason for failure, but part of our self-understanding. To challenge it feels personal, almost cruel, because it threatens the small shelter we have built around our discomfort. Yet every excuse, if kept long enough, becomes a quiet master. What begins as permission soon becomes habit, and habit hardens into character. A person who continually excuses lateness does not merely arrive late, he becomes someone unreliable. A person who excuses avoidance does not merely postpone action, he becomes someone who trusts fear more than courage. We are shaped not only by our decisions, but by the stories we tell to justify them. Excuses are often born from fear, but they survive because of pride. Pride cannot bear the humiliation of simple confession. It would rather create a complicated explanation than admit a plain weakness. To say, "I was tired," feels safer than saying, "I lack discipline." To say, "People do not understand me," feels nobler than saying, "I refuse correction." Pride is less interested in truth than in preserving dignity, even if that dignity is built on fiction. And so we become curators of our own illusions. We collect reasons why we could not, should not, must not. We point to circumstances, to childhood, to unfairness, to bad timing. Some of these things are real and heavy and deserving of compassion. But compassion becomes dangerous when it is used to excuse permanent surrender. A wound may explain a limp, but it cannot be allowed to become a lifelong argument against walking. There comes a point when growth requires the death of excuses, and death is never comfortable. To surrender an excuse is to lose a familiar defense. It means standing exposed before your own responsibility, without the old language to soften it. It means admitting that perhaps the obstacle was not fate, but habit. Not impossibility, but reluctance. Not lack of opportunity, but unwillingness to endure discomfort. This is why discipline often feels like grief. You are not merely changing behavior, you are burying a version of yourself that relied on avoidance to survive. The person who always had an alibi must disappear. The person who could retreat into endless explanation must be denied the pleasure of self justification. Something in you resists this because excuses are comforting precisely because they protect innocence. As long as there is an excuse, there is no need for repentance. But innocence preserved through dishonesty is only another form of imprisonment. Freedom begins where excuses end. The moment you say without decoration, "This is my responsibility," something shifts. The burden may feel heavier, but the soul becomes lighter. Responsibility is frightening because it removes the fantasy that someone else will rescue you. Yet it is also liberating, because what belongs to you can finally be changed by you. Many people wait for motivation when what they truly need is confession. They do not need another inspirational moment. They need the courage to stop lying to themselves. The problem is rarely hidden. It sits plainly in the room, but we keep turning the lights down so we do not have to look at it directly. To kill an excuse is a kind of moral awakening. It is the refusal to let comfort masquerade as wisdom. It is the decision to stop negotiating with your lesser self. It is the acceptance that your future will not be built by your intentions, but by the responsibilities you finally stop avoiding. Potential is one of the most flattering words ever given to a human being. It carries the sound of hidden greatness, of unspoken promise, of something noble waiting beneath the ordinary surface of life. People admire potential because it asks for nothing in the present while suggesting everything in the future. To be called gifted, capable, or full of promise feels like a blessing. Yet beneath that compliment lies a burden many are unwilling to carry. For potential is not merely possibility, it is responsibility. Many people love the idea of what they could become more than the reality of becoming it. Possibility is safe because it lives in imagination. It cannot fail there. A talented person can spend years protected by the sentence, "I could have, if I wanted." That phrase is a strange shelter. It allows a man to preserve his pride without ever submitting his gifts to the test of discipline. As long as greatness remains theoretical, it remains untouched by disappointment. But potential, if continually ignored, begins to accuse. There is a quiet sorrow in knowing you were entrusted with something and chose comfort instead. Not everyone fears failure. Many fear the evidence of their own ability. For if you truly can become more, then your excuses lose their innocence. If you are capable of discipline, then laziness is no longer merely unfortunate. It is chosen. If you are capable of courage, then avoidance becomes harder to justify. Responsibility enters the room the moment possibility becomes believable. This is why some people remain intentionally small. Smallness can feel merciful. It asks less of you. If you convince yourself that you are ordinary, powerless, or destined for little, then life becomes simpler. You are relieved from the demand to rise. There is no need to risk, to strive, to endure failure, because the story has already been written in modest terms. But often this humility is not humility at all. It is disguised fear. True humility does not deny gifts, it accepts them without vanity and uses them without excuse. False humility, on the other hand, hides behind self-doubt because self-doubt is safer than responsibility. A man says, "I am probably not capable," when what he truly means is, "If I never try, I never have to know." He would rather preserve uncertainty than face the judgment of reality. There is also loneliness in potential. The moment you begin to honor your abilities, certain relationships may change. Some people are comfortable with your dreams only as long as they remain dreams. They applaud your ambition as entertainment, but grow uneasy when discipline makes it real. Your growth reminds them of their own neglect. Your seriousness exposes their excuses. Not everyone celebrates transformation, especially when it demands they examine themselves. To become what you are capable of becoming often requires leaving behind the comfort of being underestimated. It means disappointing the version of yourself that wanted applause without sacrifice. It means waking up to the uncomfortable truth that talent is not a medal to wear, but a debt to repay. Gifts are not ornaments for admiration, they are tools for service, and neglected tools rust. There is a moral weight to unused potential. It is not simply sad, it is tragic. A seed was not made to remain admired in the hand. It was made to disappear into the dark, to split open, to endure the violence of becoming. Potential untouched remains beautiful, but barren. It pleases the eye and disappoints the purpose. Many people keep restarting because starting preserves potential. As long as the work is unfinished, they can still imagine themselves extraordinary. Completion is frightening because it reveals the truth. It replaces fantasy with evidence. It demands that you meet yourself honestly, not as a promise but as a person. To accept responsibility for your potential is to stop asking whether you might be capable and begin acting as though your life matters enough to require discipline. It is to understand that the greatest fear is not failing to become remarkable, but succeeding just enough to realize how much was left unlived.